Hi, this is Mark from In America and Russia. Today we're going to actually talk a little bit about history, and I know that may sound boring to a lot of you, but just stick around. There may be a couple of interesting points for you. Well, many of you have heard about the Bolshevik Revolution that took place in October of 1917. I think most people have heard of this. What a lot of people don't understand is that there were many other counter-revolutions happening at the same time. The one that most people know about is the Russian Civil War, where the White Army and the Red Army clashed against each other, and the Red Army ultimately prevailing. But that's not all there was. There was also one called the the Tambov peasant uprising of 1920. And this was actually the largest peasant uprising and the best organized peasant uprising in all of Russia. It didn't just take place in Tambov. It took place, it spread to the surrounding regions. You'll see them on the map here. This rebellion was organized and led by a man named Alexander Antonov. The rebellion was actually named Antonov's Mutiny. Without going into too much detail, I'll tell you a little bit about this. Now, Antonov wasn't an anti-Bolshevik. No, quite the contrary. He was very much in line with their ideas. As a matter of fact, in the early 1900s, before the revolution, he and some of his criminal friends were robbing people and assaulting and murdering and doing horrible things. He finally got caught because he was robbing a train to steal all of the goods. It's a mail train, to steal all of the goods off the mail train. This is while the Tsar was still in power. He got caught. He got sentenced to 20 years of hard labor. But he never finished that sentence because partially through that sentence, the Bolshevik Revolution happened. The Bolsheviks let him out of prison because they felt he was just some sort of a political prisoner, even though we mentioned the word murders and all of that. But anyhow, Bolsheviks, what can you expect? He returned to his town, a town called Kisanov, which is in the Tambov region. And there somehow he ended up being the chief of police, or head constable. And Kisanov had a high crime rate, had a problem with crimes. And Antonov pretty much solved it very quickly. He solved it by creating martial law, taking away everybody's rights. And one thing about martial law that it does do is it does cut down on the crime rate afterwards, because you're not free to do anything. You have no freedom of movement. You have no free anything. My point of mentioning this is the following, that we hear that he had led a peasant rebellion against the Bolsheviks, and automatically we assume he's a good guy. Well, he wasn't a good guy. He was quite the bad guy. And the Bolsheviks weren't the good guys. They're both bad guys. See, we have a tendency, especially in the West, to be thinking in black and white terms, literally. Black hat for the bad guy, white hat for the good guy. There's got to be a good guy and there's got to be a bad guy, and if this is the enemy, then the person fighting him must be good, where that isn't really the way of the real world. Matter of fact, that's very, very rare. It's very easy to have two bad guys or two wrong people fighting against each other, or it can be two good guys, two good countries fighting against each other. Right and wrong, it seems very rarely plays into the end result of these things. I understand in Hollywood, there's always a good guy, always a bad guy, but in real life, this isn't really so. Now, you'd expect to hear, since these were peasants revolting, that the peasants must have hated the Bolsheviks and wanted them out of power. Quite the contrary. The peasants kind of loved the Bolsheviks. They loved what they stood for, because remember, one of the first things the Bolsheviks did is they took away all of the land, the private ownership of land. They killed off these landowners. They killed off the wealthy, imprisoned them, or they left. They just they just managed to get out of the country in time. The peasants loved the Bolsheviks for the main following reason, and that is that because of them taking away the land, the Bolsheviks promised all the peasants that they were going to take all this land that they confiscated and give it to all the peasants, since they're the ones that worked the land, so therefore they rightly owned it. Of course, the peasants bought this load of crap, and of course, this never happened. Now, I spoke about not believing in black and white, good and bad, good versus evil in today's, or 100 years ago in different wars. Another thing, people often have this romanticized view of peasants as hardworking farmers, like working the land, all the right moral systems, just great people. In fact, you wouldn't like most peasants. You wouldn't like peasants or the modern day version of peasants now. And I've met several and been exposed to several, and as a rule, they're not as they are in these little fairy tales. But anyhow, let's move on. The reason why the peasants wanted to rebel was because the Bolsheviks, in their idiocy, decided to confiscate their grain, the produce, and the livestock. And not a small percent, and not an amount based upon any factor other than this is what we need. So they decided to confiscate grain, produce, livestock from these peasants to feed the people in the city, to feed their army, etc., etc. And the peasants were thinking that these people are not taking into account the crop failures of the year, or what we need for seed for the following year, or even what we need to eat ourselves, much less have a little bit of profit. Well, this was now Bolshevik country, so no such thing as profit. So basically, the peasants rebelled due to hunger, due to the fear of hunger. That's why they rebelled. And Alexander Antonov was able to gather them to his cause, and they welcomed him. He was quite a good leader of this type of thing. The Tambov region, along with some of the surrounding regions, is known as the Black Earth region of Russia, meaning it's very fertile. This is where most of the crops are grown. And I know this firsthand because this is where I live. Now, when I say Black Earth, out in my yard, I could dig a hole, and I could dig a hole 2 meters or just over 6 feet deep before I finally leave topsoil. I've got at least 6 feet of topsoil, 2 meters, before I hit sand or clay or anything else. And this is the truth. I've never seen anything like it. And beyond that, even, speaking about digging, there are no rocks here. There are like no stones. I mean, in my entire property, or on the top or under it, I have never even seen a stone or a rock the size of my fist. Never. That's how it's a dream to shovel. It's just incredible. Now, I'm from New England, and it's just the opposite situation. New England, part of the United States. There, the soil, the topsoil is not really deep, and the earth is very, very rocky. We refer to it as, we say our soil is very bony, which just our way of saying it's full of rocks. Trying to dig a hole anywhere is really, really hard, and it requires pickaxes, levers to pry rocks, and sometimes you just have to move the hole because you've hit a rock too big to get out under any circumstances. And the other thing, even in terms of topsoil, if you have 6 inches, or I don't know what that is, 15 centimeters of topsoil, you got some pretty good soil there. And the soil, like where I live, was more of a brown color, the topsoil. Here it's just black. Since I'm already off on a tangent, I might as well continue down that tangent path. Something else that we don't have here in the Tambov region that struck me as so strange. We don't have biting insects. I mean, there are no biting insects. During the summer, I can go out. I spend probably, on average, because I work on my lawn, I do a lot of work outdoors on my property, I spend maybe 5 hours a day outside. And during the whole spring and summer season, I might get bit by a mosquito maybe 2-3 times maximum. And there are no black flies or other biting flies. It's just really, really weird. It's really, really nice, actually. Now, I lived in New England, which had lots of mosquitoes and other things. Particularly the state of Maine was, I think, the worst of any place I lived there. There, the mosquitoes were so bad that people had T-shirts. We call mosquitoes the Maine state bird. Beyond mosquitoes, and worse than mosquitoes, we had black flies. Black flies were much smaller than mosquitoes, and they would bite into you and draw blood, and they hurt. And during the month of May, you couldn't leave your house if you lived in a rural area unless you had long sleeves, buttoned, long pants, socks, a hat, and a net to go over your head. That's the only way you could spend any time out in your yard or cut your lawn even, for that matter. It was really, really horrible. In fact, there's a saying in Maine. The saying says, "Black flies don't bite, they suck." It was a beautiful area, Maine, but during the month of May, you had to enjoy the beauty from looking out the window from the protection of the indoors, because it was just so horrible out there with black flies. Well, let's get back to Tambov Peasant Rebellion. It's 1920. Because of the forced appropriation of crops, produce, livestock, Antonov was forced to flee into the forests, and he fled there also with a lot of ex-Tsarist soldiers that left from the White Army, with people left from his former political party, which was not a good political party, along with many peasants. These people, this militia, would swoop down upon different villages when the Soviet officials came to try to collect their large share of crops, etc., etc., and they would kill the Soviet officials. They literally killed hundreds of these Soviet officials who were sent out to collect these things. Finally, a large group of them, and these people numbered up to 50,000 at one point, at the high point, and not all of them were armed, maybe half, but I mean, they were armed with machine guns and pistols and, some good weapons. The ones that weren't armed with these weapons had farm implements to use as weapons. But a large group of these decided they were going to take over the capital of the region, which is the city of Tambov, and they marched on to Tambov, the city. Within about 10 kilometers of the city, these people, many of them, were machine gunned down by the Bolsheviks, who caught word they were coming, set up machine gun nests, and just brutally killed them all as they were coming in. At that point, this whole big militia actually gained in people because the Bolsheviks were going into villages that weren't giving the amount of money and beating the living hell out of people. I mean, including 70-year-old men. They were beating them. These people all took off into the forest, started up this huge militia. And this isn't the end of the story. As a matter of fact, this is just part of it. But I don't want to go any deeper right now on this video into this story because for a lot of people, history makes their eyes glaze over and they lose interest very quickly. I'll continue on a different episode with this Tambov Peasant Rebellion, and it involves incredible scale of killing, Bolsheviks killing, including killing off hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands, with poison gas even. It's quite the tale, and we never really heard about this stuff in the West because, remember, at this point, it was the Soviet Union. It was ruled by the Bolsheviks, and it was a secret country. Nobody heard about any of the horrible things that were going on there. Now, thanks a lot if you did watch up to this point. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to ask, too, that please subscribe to my channel and press like or leave comments. We can have a little bit of discussion about things. You can ask questions. I can try to answer them. Google does not take my channel and suggest it basically to anyone. If you look at the number of views I have, I think you'll understand. I think all the views are my friends and cousins and children. Anyhow, they don't suggest it to anybody because I produce a narrative about Russia that's much different than what they're trying to produce. I'm trying to do a channel that's non-political either way. So anyhow, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time. Until then, пока.